This webinar is being recorded by the City of Dallas and may be used for a variety of purposes, including promotional materials without compensation or prior approvals. Good morning, everyone. My name is Liz Cedillo Pereira, and I serve as the Chief of Equity and Inclusion for the City of Dallas. Thank you for joining us today for part 3 of our Black Lives Matter Community Conversations on Racial Equity, Justice, and Resilience series. This series is a collaborative between the City of Dallas, Office of Equity, and Dallas, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, so that we can engage through dialogue with our community around our community's needs, leading with race. It is our goal at the city's Equity and Inclusion team to center African American voices as we strive to be better informed in our allyship and equity efforts. Today's conversation is about resilience and what it means for the African American community of Dallas, and how the city can help African American communities and all vulnerable communities become more resilient in the face of hardship. In 2018, the City of Dallas set out to adopt a Resilient Dallas strategy, which is a 7-goal framework that focuses on bridging equity, economic, and social gaps in Dallas. The framework helps the city advance equity through holistic short-term and long-term policies and programs. This year, we are updating the Resilience Dallas strategy to what we are calling the Resilience 2.0 strategy. In the 2.0 strategy, we're proposing new goals that focuses on public safety and law enforcement issues, such as restorative justice, legal representation, mental health programs, and more. We would like to gain our community's input in shaping this strategy. In the chat box today, please let us know what you would like to see in the city's Resilience 2.0 strategy, what you would like it to look like. We are also going to develop more input opportunities for the community, so please keep an eye out for those announcements soon. I look forward to having a productive and robust conversation with our moderator, Lady Jade, and our esteemed panelists who have joined us today. I will now pass it to Councilmember Casey Thomas, the chairman of the Workforce, Education, and Equity Committee, who has been a strong champion for equity and inclusion efforts at the city. Thank you, and good morning, Chair Thomas.
Good morning, Liz, and good morning, everyone. I want to say thank you, Liz, for your leadership on this. This is part 3 of our 3-part series entitled Black Lives Matter. And today we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is resilience. As Liz spoke about, we have for years, several years within the city of Dallas, been working to establish our Dallas Resilience Strategy. And now as chair of the Workforce Education and Equity Committee, this work falls under my committee. The work on resilience strategy is centered in racial equity, and everything that we do as a city through a equity lens. Our budgeting process is through an equity lens. The decisions that we make in terms of investments are through a racial equity lens. And so I'm proud to say here in the city of Dallas, we approved unanimously a resolution on racial equity, and that resolution guides and directs all of our work around resilience and equity. I look forward to us establishing the tenets and framework for Resilience 2.0 as we begin to make Dallas the city that we can all be proud of. And so at this time, Liz, I'm gonna pass it back to you so you can introduce our moderator and we can get this great panel started. Thank you. You're muted.
Let's do that, Chair Thomas. And I'm pleased to introduce Lady Jade, who I'm sure everyone has heard of and heard on K104 as a morning radio co-host. What you may not know about Lady Jade is that she is a Dallas native and a graduate of Texas State University. Beyond radio, she is the president and founder of Project 16, whose mission is to equip and inspire youth to realize the broad spectrum of educational paths and career options available to them beyond what they may see in their immediate surroundings. In addition to being a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Lady Jade is a leader in our community and an influencer for young women. Thank you, Lady Jade, for moderating this discussion today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Was a nice warm welcome. Wow, I wasn't expecting that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and thank you all for having me today. Thank you to all our participants that have joined on, and especially thank you to the City of Dallas for allowing me to moderate such an important conversation for our city. I am sincerely thrilled to be here today. As we know, these conversations are very important and necessary, and I'm sure if we're all honest, we might even be tired of having the conversation, right? But we know how extremely important it is to continue having them and not let up until we see substantial changes in our areas, our communities, and our country. We've seen firsthand how too many Dallas residents in the African American community experience homelessness. We're dealing with poverty on a daily basis, unemployment, racial inequity, food insecurity, and the lack of access to quality healthcare and education. So you guys, no longer are the days that we can accept these things as normal and being just the way things are. So today is meant to be a conversation. So I encourage everyone that's joined on today, we want to hear from you. We want to take your questions. So please feel free to post any questions that you may have in our Q&A box, and we will try our best to get to as many as possible before we wrap on today, okay? So as Casey was saying earlier, we previously talked about racial equity in part one of this series. We've also addressed justice in part two. And today we are focusing on resilience. So I'd like to meet our panel on today, which you guys are in for. This is going to be a great discussion because I am really, really pleased and excited to some of them I already know, some of them I do not. So I'm going to turn it over to our panel to introduce themselves. So if you could tell us your name, your title, and a brief description of what that title entails, and we will kick it off with our Dallas City Manager, TC Broadnax.
Thank you, Lady Jade. Good morning. Again, as Lady Jade indicated, I am TC Broadnax, City Manager for the City of Dallas. Been doing this job for about 3 years. Excited to participate in the panel. Hopeful I'll be able to impart some wisdom here. I'm just really excited about the panelists here. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation and looking forward, hopefully, to sharing what the City of Dallas is doing in relationship to resilience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. Dr. McElroy, how are you? We're going to get you unmuted. How are you?
Yes, I'm doing well.
Good. Thank you for being here. Thank you. We definitely appreciate it.
I'm happy and pleased to be here.
Yes, ma'am. So can you tell everybody that's watching today a little bit about your accolades? You have a long list.
Yes, well, storytelling is my main mission.
Yes.
And since the 60s, I've been involved in productions. And those productions have to do with Black life and trying to heal, stories for racial healing. Those are included in my writings and in my plays. In fact, we did one of those productions at Paul Quinn and Dr. Sorrell. I don't know whether you can see this, but this was the program. It was a huge event. And one of my students called me yesterday from Arizona, and he also knows President Sorrell, and he is following a lot of my dictates he took the course, storytelling course at SMU, and he's now involved with a group of young people, teaching them some of the things he learned from my class and teaching them about Black heroes.
That is awesome.
My main reason for being here is to make sure that my legend continues. Students also call me Queen Professor.
I love that.
So a lot of the Queen Professor's instructions I would like to continue. So Christian Vasquez and my daughter Marion are producing a documentary, and they're working very hard. Christian started 2 years ago, and the problem now is he and Marion are trying to raise funds to finish it off. It's expedient that we get that finished.
Yes, ma'am.
So I wanted everyone to know about that. So if you have any fundraising ideas, get in touch with Marion.
I love that. I love that. Well, it is an honor and a privilege to have you on here today. And I am sure there are so many people watching today that have been inspired by you. So thank you for being here and taking your time. Next up, we have Dr. Kelvin Baguette. How are you? Welcome.
I'm doing great, Lady Jade. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Liz Tadeo Pereira, for organizing this. I am delighted and honored to be a part of this. I've been in healthcare for now, I'd count a little over 20 years. And from being a practicing physician to being an administrator. But one of the common themes has been my work to reduce disparities and to promote health equity, and have been funded by the government and other sources to work on that in the past. So while I would prefer that we not have to have this conversation in 2020, I'm delighted that we are having it. One of the roles that I'm playing that is certainly relevant to this is about 2 months ago, I was appointed by Mayor Eric Johnson of the city of Dallas to serve as the city of Dallas's COVID-19 health and healthcare access czar. And so have been working very hard around the clock on that over the last 2 months with several individuals who are in this conversation as well. So I'm delighted to participate and to contribute to the conversation.
As we're delighted to have you. Thank you so much. And up next, we have Bimnit Mashesha. Did I say that right, please? I hope I got it right.
You did. Thank you, Lady Jade.
Good. Well, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. I'm honored to be in this incredible lineup of speakers. My name is Bimnit, and I am a Dalasite by way of Ethiopia. I am the Director of Community Affairs at the State Fair of Texas. So I manage our programming and some of our philanthropy work. I'm very proud to serve the South Dallas Fairpark community. I'm also the president of the Dallas-Fort Worth Urban League Young Professionals. That's a premier organization helping young people find their place, whether it's through civic engagement or community work. So a lot of my work and frame really in approaching conversations very much through a Black immigrant lens, and a lot of my published work is around that as well. And so what is that experience like as a nurse with violence or other racialized disparities? So honored to be here and contribute to the dialogue.
And thank you so much for being here as well. And then we also have Dr. Michaels Sorrell. Hey, Dr. Sorrell.
Hey, Lady Jade, how are you doing?
Good.
I thought I'd talk to you in like 2 hours, right? So
that's funny. You guys, he was on the radio with us promoting this event this morning. So yeah, it's good to speak with you again this morning. Yes.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here. I am incredibly impressed by the great work that my friend Liz is doing around this issue, and proud of the fact that the city of Dallas has taken this on in such a substantive way. Want to congratulate my fraternity brother, Councilman Thomas, for his fine work in this area, and Dr. Baguette for the work that he's doing around COVID-19, and, the city manager, TC, again, just, having the foresight to deal with all these issues. So we're just proud to be able to support it at Paul Quinn College, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to be here today.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again for joining us for this very necessary conversation. I know you all have very busy schedules, but I love the fact that you all are still dedicated to the cause and the conversations that can lead to much needed change. So we're going to jump into our questions in just a second, but I'm one of those people that believe it takes all of us for change, which means I like to reassure that everyone that's tuned in is on the same page, because clarity and understanding is the key. And it's never to insult anybody's intelligence. It's just that I want us to be all on one accord, because without clarity, there's confusion, right? So since we're discussing resilience today, I wanted to start by sharing the definition of the word resilience. Resilience is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. And if that is not a precise description of African Americans and Blacks all over the world, I do not know what is. So we're going to jump into our questions. Our first question up is going to be for Dr. McElroy. So you have a wealth of knowledge as a historian and a current racial healing storyteller. Can you discuss with us the importance of racial healing as it relates to resilience? We're gonna unmute your mic really quickly. Just a second, Dr. McWolf. There we go. Okay, we have you now.
There's a saying that stories reveal human nature. And there's also a saying from Kenya, people who talk with one another loves one another.
Mm.
So we can use storytelling, share our stories, and it reveals a lot of our nature, our character. And that way we can come to terms on some of these terrible situations that we are going through now. Last year, my daughter Marion and I were involved in a storytelling project that included 7 storytellers. I was one of the 7. My story was the catalyst because my experiences went back to the early days of Black Dallas. So the title of the project was Freedman's Town to Botham Jean. I included in my story how Black people had acquired and progressed in Freedman's Town, which was also called North Dallas. Unfortunately, that area was taken down in the cause of urban renewal, but it really was urban removal because it removed the progress and the residences of Black Dallas because of the red line, and they were forced to live there. Now they can't afford to live there because it's now the luxury area. In that area, people that we could learn a lot from, especially learning how to be resourceful and resilient. Black people were very close-knitted during those days because of racism. And my experiences were also, I was born in Sherman. My parents at the time were living in Freedman's Town. And Sherman, a few years after I was born, had one of the worst race riots, except for Tulsa, in America. And I learned how Black people bounced back from that. They never recovered their progress with the businesses, but personally, they were able to move on. I also learned resilience from my parents, my teachers, and my neighbors, who were all struggling and striving on a daily basis. One of the other stories in that collection was a young white woman who told the story of her family. Her father and grandparents were rabid racists. She said her father taught her how to fear Black males, all Black males. So when she went off to college, she met a young Black male, and they became very closely entwined. And she said that she couldn't continue the relationship because of all of the things she had been fed by her father and grandparents. And she had been carrying that burden because she felt really, really deeply hurt by the way she ended the relationship. So it started her healing by being able to tell the story. Another member of that group, in fact, this was an audience participant. He said that he grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, and it was during the time when buses were. So one day he and his friends, they were middle grade, got on the bus and they changed the signs. At that time, they had signs where you could put in the back of the chairs and it denoted where blacks could sit and where whites could sit. They took the signs and pushed them all the way back so that blacks would not have a place to sit on the bus. And he said that a black woman got on the bus and he remembers to this day how hurt she was at the stand and all the empty seats for whites. He's carried that story and realizes that even kids had white power over black people at the time. One of my greatest sources for resilience comes from my great-great-grandmother, who was 110. She had to be pretty resilient to live to be 110.
Absolutely.
She had been a slave, and her story is very similar to a lot of other slaves. She was a runaway slave. She kept running away, trying to get away from the terrible treatments. And because they would send dogs after her, and she learned how to climb trees. She ended her life in Bryant, Texas. And in the interim, she and her husband had bought property in Bryant and had lived a very remarkable life after all her struggles. So whenever I have a heavy load to carry, a hard job to do, I just think of her out in the fields, picking cotton and climbing trees and running away from dogs. That takes care of my resilience. Our story of dealing with racism, a tunnel. Imagine walking tunnel. That dark tunnel is racism, and it's a constant trauma. And we walk through that tunnel trying to find and come to that light. Once we come to the light at the end of the tunnel, we call that resilience. We're still looking for that light.
Amen. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. We definitely appreciate that. Also, you can even go to her website, and I've seen some of your videos on YouTube, and I love your quote, people who talk with one another love one another. And it is about sharing those stories. And that is the only way that we know our history, right? That is the only way that we know. I was on WFAA a couple of weeks ago, and that was one of the things I said. If you don't understand, ask the questions and allow people to share their stories. So I really appreciate you sharing that. That means a lot. I have a question really quick for Mr. Broadnax. As our city manager, Mr. Broadnax, what is your resilient vision for the city of Dallas and the African American community here?
Thanks for that question, Lady Jade. And I will just say, Ms. McElroy's story was, I guess, really touched me to the extent that understanding where we are today and how, as you discussed, that African Americans have continually been forced to be resilient just to get through the days on end, particularly given a lot of the systemic things that go on in this community. As it relates to resilience for me and my vision for this city, I think Councilmember Thomas, as well as Liz, touched on where the city's foundational pieces are, which lend themselves to my vision as it relates to helping us achieve what I think has long been huge gaps in how Dallas has seen certain parts of our community that have often been situated with people of color, African American as well as Latino. And before we talk about the vision, I think we've got to at least put in some work and discussion on where we are today and why we are where we are in our journey around resilience. And so back in 2016, we were one of 100 cities selected by the Rockefeller Foundation to participate in resilient cities. This was throughout the entire world. And it was really about, again, as you described what resilience was, focusing on how do we adapt and bounce back from whether natural disasters and or man-made stressors, such as poverty, generational poverty, homelessness, and other types of inadequacies that often find themselves showing up in communities of color. We, in 2018, adopted 7 principles and goals as it relates to our resilience strategy. And we're working tirelessly to try to find ways within our organization to get after those things. And those 7 goals were, for the sake of people listening, advancing equity, internally and externally in this community, becoming a welcoming city, obviously attracting and ensuring that we are taking care of and welcoming immigrants who want to come and be a part of our community, economic mobility. If you've seen parts of our southern sector, you know we've continually got work to do there. Equitable access to services in our service delivery and resources, healthy communities, and I know Dr. Baguette will talk through much of that, particularly as it relates to the pandemic, our infrastructure in our neighborhoods. And you don't have to read a book about it to experience it when you go to parts of our community to show that we have not just kept pace with what we've already got in the ground, but there are certain things in certain communities that don't even exist that should in 2020. And then environmental sustainability. And so the last 2 years, quite honestly, I've been here 3. We've worked very hard, and as Councilmember Thomas spoke to, have started to lay the foundational pieces down to help us get through this journey and through the other side. We've had in 2019, October of 2019, actually, we updated our equity indicators report, which shows the disparities that when you think about what the pandemic has revealed, we had a head start in understanding that that was likely to show up based on some of the indicators that we had shown where health disparities were so large in certain communities. We've achieved as the first city in Texas to get the Welcoming Cities certification and designation around the work that Liz Cedillo Pereira and her team have been doing with the support of the City Council. We recently completed our greenhouse gas emission inventory, identifying the largest emission sources. And I don't have to tell you the conversation that's gone on in this community around where we've placed housing and or actually placed industry next to housing in certain communities that I think in some cases and in many cases is a dereliction of duty as it relates to our zoning and land use here. And so we're hopeful with our new Forward Dallas plan to remediate some of those things and begin to put zoning and land use in places that are conducive to people that want to live next to things that should not be noxious uses. And lastly, we've created and completed a Cool, Clean, and Resilience Dallas pilot project in 2018 that serves as the foundation for what was recently adopted, our comprehensive environmental climate action plan that hopefully will begin to do the work to right many of the issues that have allowed certain communities to suffer from an environmental perspective. But as we look at Resilience 2.0, as Councilmember Thomas fashioned it, we're looking at what has occurred the last 2 years since we adopted our initial plan. And I wouldn't have to tell you because you've seen what's gone on, particularly with the civil unrest and the demand for certain types of changes around certain parts of our community. We're going to have a sharper focus, obviously, as someone indicated, on public safety and what are the factors that we have to address that deal with some of the systemic issues there that impact and keep certain communities at a state of always looking up at what success looks like. We're going to focus on mental illness, working with our county counterparts to figure out how we strengthen that social safety net, again, to deal with whether it's current traumas and or past traumas in this community, and try to do that with and part of a conversation with the community. We're going to uplift our LGBTQ community, particularly our transgender community, around some of the things we've seen over the last few years that impact them in greater ways than they do, even some cases, African Americans as a whole. The food insecurity issue, again, has been a gap in our southern part of Dallas for many years, and we've got to find a way to do that at the same time, bringing economic viability that allows for some of those things that attract the private sector to want to invest in certain areas. And then just look at our own internal policies around some of our programs, fines and fees, and how they continue to add to the cycle of poverty, particularly around things we may do, for example, with our auto pounds and other things that when you take someone's car just from sitting on the street and then they can't afford the $400 or $500 in fines to get it out, you've exacerbated their situation. They may end up losing their job. Obviously, the transit situation in this community, particularly the southern sector, is not what it needs to be to get people where they need to go. And so we may be part of the problem. We've got to do a deep dive in our own house to figure out how we make life better for people. But again, my vision, quite honestly, beyond what we're working on, is to ensure that no matter what your zip code is or what your birthright might have been, that you do not have to start 10 steps behind the person that lives in another zip code and or has had a blessed life before they were even born, that you can reach your full potential. And the city should not be standing in the way. We should be figuring out how to help ensure that we help people get out of situations and don't put them in other situations. So I'm excited about how we look at resilience here and looking forward to working with our council and the community to figure out how we energize our plans to meet the test of the times and what's going on today, and then that it lasts beyond while I'm here and many of us on this call are here, but for future generations.
Definitely appreciate you sharing that. I think that a lot of times we see the city of Dallas and we think that it's one-dimensional, two-dimensional, maybe even three-dimensional. But as you just shared with us, there are so many layers and so many things that are going on at the same time. We thank you that you guys are pushing that envelope forward so that, like you said, no matter what zip code you were born into, no matter what your birthright is, we all have that equal opportunity as those that were born on the other side of town, right? So
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. By the way, if you would like to learn more about the City of Dallas's Office of Resilience and the Dallas Resilience Strategy, you definitely can visit the Dallas City Hall website, or the link is in the chat as well. We see some questions coming through, so we definitely see those. So please continue to submit your questions that we'll take here in just a moment. Miss Mashesha, how are you today? I'm gonna try to get your mic unmuted. There we go. Okay, all right, just making sure your mic was unmuted. Well, given your expertise in race and upward mobility, can you expound for us on the role of race, criminal justice, and inclusive economies that relates to addressing transformational change that is sustainable?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There's a lot of things I was thinking about and preparing for today. Can you guys hear me okay?
It's a little echoey. It's kind of slight bounce back.
Okay. Try to move. So if you can't, I can pause and try to move again. Just let me know.
Okay. Ms. Liz, do you think it's okay, or do you want us to, because I want to make sure, I want to make sure that people are able to hear.
Can we come back to Bennett, Lady
Okay.
Jade? Can we come
Yes.
back to her? That would be great.
We'll come back to you in just a moment, and I'll ask you the same question, so no worries.
Okay, I'm gonna move just a second.
Okay, no worries. Dr. Sorrell, thank you so much for being here today. As a president of an HBCU, you're widely known for your work in rethinking the role of colleges and universities in preparing students, particularly African-American students and students of color, for success beyond college. So on this journey, what have you identified as the biggest challenge to achieving racial equity at all levels of education? Don't forget to unmute your mic, Dr. Sorrell. There you go. There you go. All right.
Deep, and I was stuck in mute.
No, I
Bill,
saw
right?
it. I saw you. I was like, he is really sharing something right now. That's all good.
Well, here's the thing. The pathway to resilience, as we understand it, is that has to travel through addressing the traumas that people have experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And the trauma associated with poverty is something that too few people, especially in the educational environments, fully understand and appreciate. And I don't know if anyone in society fully appreciates. If you have lived your life in poverty, every touch point that you have had has been artificially influenced by scarcity, right? So you've never been given the opportunity to breathe, to just exist, to just look outside and see the beauty of nature and see it for that. You've always seen it through this idea that you don't have enough of it and it's not for you. Now, I know we're talking about race, and I've introduced poverty into this, but the racial perspective is relevant here because it's the same type of thing. If your entire life you have been forced to view each encounter through the prism of your race, that has altered you in ways that, you know, you may never fully understand or appreciate. And then I'll use myself as an example. When Brother Floyd was killed and everyone had the reaction that they had, I found myself not having that reaction. And I didn't have that reaction, not because I wasn't horrified by what took place, but because for me, I had that reaction 4 years ago with Eric Garner, right? I've never been able to get his words out of my mouth. I've never been able to unsee what happened watching him die on YouTube. And so we talk about resilience in a way that sometimes, quite frankly, I'm uncomfortable with because it underestimates, I think, the challenge in getting people to hope again. Because the fundamental quality of an effective resilience strategy is encouraging people to believe that something can change and be better. It's to regain their access to hope. And hope is a precious commodity. If you've lived your entire life without it, I mean, just all of a sudden be up and said, hey, we see you now. We want to be different to you. There's no guarantee that you're able to embrace that. We see it at the college. We've seen it for the 13 years that I've been president. We have been very intentional about trying to love our students out of poverty mindset and scarcity mindset. And what that has taught us is that it is a half a step forward and that something doesn't happen to require 2 steps backwards, right? Because forward progress is slow, but that retraction, that fighting can be very, very quick. And so at the end of the day, we have to do all the things that, you know, TC described. I think we have to do all the things that the city is doing such a wonderful job of implementing. But I also think we have to build in the mechanisms for an intensive amount of counseling support for people who, you know, you'll look at and you'll say, well, we dealt with this, and they can't access it because the foundation has never been laid for them to look at themselves and look at the environment different.
Which is, that's amazing that you bring that up. And as in regards to what Mr. Broadnax also said when he talked about the mental illness, you know, addressing that, you know, that's unspoken of in our community, you know, because we have been taught to be resilient, and you just keep going and you don't address trauma. You don't even see it as trauma, right? Yeah. So I love that you're adding that layer onto that as well. Let me ask you, with you saying, how are the students at, I know we're on break right now, but how have you noticed that the students are handling the state of America right now as it relates to the, you know, racial disharmony and everything that's going on?
Oh, they're overwhelmed, right? I mean, they're overwhelmed because let's just put this into context. We spend all this time and effort, you know, at Paul Quinn, every student upon entry gets a mental health evaluation, right?
Oh, wow.
And we do that to normalize the conversation and to normalize the experience and to say to them, there is nothing wrong with saying, I need help. And we're going to reinforce this because everywhere you look, people are going to treat it as if it's just business as usual. It's nothing on our campus to see people say, I need to go talk to a counselor, right? And we're very, very proud of that. And so you're building all of this in, and then you're disrupted abruptly of the global pandemic. And then all summer long, the hit just keeps coming with the global pandemic. It has been mismanaged at the national level. And so, you know, it just keeps getting worse.
Right.
Now you add into that the issues around police brutality. So you've taken people who have been made to be fearful of just physical contact, and
Right.
the fact that they're watching someone die. They know people who have been harassed. They know people who have been marginalized. They themselves have been harassed and marginalized. And it's just too much. So it explodes. And now they want to be out. They want to protest. They want to engage. They want to affect change. But to do so puts them at great risk for
Yes.
coming home with the virus and maybe harming someone that they love, because we know that the virus disproportionately impacts the lives of our Black and Latino families, right? So now your head is spinning because you're frustrated and you're scared. You're
Right.
angry for generational wrongs, right? And dealing with this trauma, dealing with the fact this era of American life is something that we will be helping our students unpack, I think, for at least a generation and a half.
Wow. It's crazy to hear you telling the stories and the perception of the students at Paul Quinn today are right in line with the same stories that Dr. McElroy was sharing earlier. Like that's insane. It's the same story at a different time.
No,
That is.
that's right. And, our hope, our prayer, our commitment has to be that no one tells this story again.
There you go.
This story stops now. And I don't know if that's possible.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Dr. Sorrell, you mentioned the global pandemic. So I have to ask Dr. Baguette, we've seen the ways that the COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted the Black community. We know that longstanding systemic health and social inequities have put the Black community at a higher risk. So how can we advance resilience in the Black community in light of all the health and racial inequities?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And I also want to comment, Dr. Sorrell, Mike, also a dear friend. It's always a pleasure to be in your company and to be reminded of the great things you're doing at Paul Quinn.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your leadership. So what I'll say about COVID-19 and its impact on the Black community is that I don't think for many of us within the community that we found it to be as surprising that we would be the hardest hit.
There you go.
For many of the reasons that have been cited. When I grew up, I'd be reminded that we often get the worst of whatever the worst is. So we get more of that. And what it has exposed is the vulnerability that exists in our community. And what I've attempted to remind people is it is not innate and it is attributable to genetics. That is not what this is about. We have a mortality rate associated with COVID-19 that's 2 times greater at the national level than white Americans. We're seeing various factors that play into that, and one of them is what I hear often is a comment around pre-existing conditions,
Right.
and often people like to represent these pre-existing conditions as if they were genetically programmed and that we came and emerged with them from birth. What we know is so much that happens to our health is environmental. We've known it for decades. We've characterized it most commonly as the social determinants of health. So when we talk about the fact that people of color have higher rates of high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, kidney failure, we have to also recognize that is in part due to the fact that we are also more likely to live in communities with higher degrees of poverty, less well-developed, robust educational opportunities, so poor and failing schools, where we are being inflicted by stressors, some of which we've already discussed that are coming at us daily, and now we understand those stressors not only affect your body, but they also affect your brain. That having the constant stress also can have a negative impact on your overall development, just your general development, and that we're also more likely to live in crowded spaces, to have less access to healthcare, not even quality healthcare, just healthcare in general. We live in healthcare deserts, food deserts, with a greater percentage. And so we have to recognize that, and we have to continue at this time to make known that it is not because of the way that we were built at birth. It is because of some of these structural and systemic inadequacies that these things are made to flourish. We live in environments and we function in environments where our kids are more likely to be targeted for unhealthy products, drinks, and foods. And to also have limited access to alternatives that might be healthier. So there are a lot of factors here at play. And so how do we get through this? What I can say is that we have demonstrated grit and resilience our entire existence in America. We have found ways to suffer, endure, and fight through and emerge from circumstances that I say could have defeated, and in certain situations and circumstances did defeat others. And so we do have part of that built into not only our DNA, but also into our culture. And that's what's going to get us through this. That combined with making our demands and requests known and making it clear that with this recognition that COVID-19 specifically is hitting Black and brown people harder, let's dig beneath the surface and understand some of the reasons why. And then let's work together, as I'm pleased to say, having this voluntary appointment with the city of Dallas, I'm learning even more about the work that T.C. Broadnax and Liz Cedillo-Pereira and others have been doing to address these things and to address them systemically, structurally, in a way that's going to produce a more sustainable outcome. So that is what we have to do. What I've also shared and speak to are a couple things is what do we have to do as individuals? Yes. One of the things is, so I'll give you 4 or 5. We have to acknowledge where we are as an individual and in part where our community is. And what does that mean? COVID-19 has also hit us because at times when people would talk about pre-existing conditions, they weren't putting it in language that was easily understandable. So I say, well, I don't have a pre-existing condition. I have diabetes. Yeah. You got to talk plain. And that is, if you've got some health issues, that's what we're talking about. And let's talk about what those health issues are, and let's use some plain language. So let's make sure we do that. The second thing is, I think what we have been able to do is kind of determine what is in your control. What things might you be able to influence, and you've got to connect that to some other factors. How do we promote those things? I think forums like this, I think some of the other forums that are being held, so that people are more aware of what resources may be available, what actions they may be able to take. But then you got to get to that next step, which is you have to pursue them, you got to seek them out, and you got to use your community. I don't know if it was Dr. Sorrell or somebody, I think it was Dr. Sorrell, commented on and maybe even T.C. Broadnax, that we have often stigmatized things that can be even more detrimental to our long-term health. And one of them is mental health.
Yes.
I'm a primary care physician by background. And what I recognize is there were 2 common diagnoses in my practice: low back pain and something related to mental health and behavioral health. Those were the 2. And they were often undiagnosed because unless you raised the second one around mental health and behavioral health, people didn't bring it. They just dealt with it. There was that relative who maybe had some concerns, maybe was identified as having some issues that might have been addressed, that might have been a little, and they were often ignored. Mm-hmm. They were occasionally criticized, and seeking help was stigmatized. We have to get beyond that, because it's not just us, it's everybody. And in this era of COVID-19, we're seeing more and more people suffer from mental health because of the stress, the economic concern, the health concerns, the instability concerns, the lack of security that we already had that are now being layered even more on top of that. So we've got to admit that, and we've got we've got to come forward. And then with that, we got to seek the help and the support that's necessary. So those are my, I'm incredibly passionate, as I kind of led in the introduction. I decided I didn't say this, but I decided I wanted to be a doctor at 9 years of age. And
Wow.
the reason was I was living in a community that looked very much like our typical community. And what I recognized was that I was surrounded by people who were suffering from poor health that was limiting their capacity to live a fulfilling life. And what I said was, the least I can do is use what I think are some of the intelligence that God has given me to make sure people don't have to suffer unnecessarily. I have dedicated my life in some part of working to address health disparities and health inequities. And I have never felt more so that this was a time and an opportunity to create and drive meaningful change that will improve the health and lives of not only our community, but the entire nation. Our nation has spent far too much time talking about the cost of providing health care as opposed to the cost of illness and not providing care. And we've got to shift that conversation so that they understand that we are vital and our health is vital to the health of this nation and to its future productivity and stance in the world.
Dr. Baguette, you have preached up in here today. Do you understand? Like, thank you. And I appreciate you breaking it down and making it clear and understandable for our participants that are on today, as well as for myself. And as you said, we do have a lot of work to be done. And thank you for your service and thank you for what you're doing. You mentioned something earlier. You said, we in our community, we are not surprised that we get the worst of the worst. That has to change.
Yes.
I am so sick of us not being surprised by it.
Yes.
Like we and even Dr. Sorrell addressed giving hope. You get what I'm saying? We need hope again. And we cannot continue to settle for accepting the worst of the worst. So thank you so much. You also actually answered one of our questions that came through our chat from Ronnie Jackson. So thank you for that. And see, you didn't even know that was a spirit movement right there. You feel what I'm saying? Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes. All right, Vimnet, thank you so much for rejoining us. I know you have some information you'd love to share with us. Can you expound on the role of race, criminal justice, and inclusive economies as it relates to addressing transformational change that is sustainable?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me better now?
You sound amazing. Yes.
All right.
Thank you. I know it can be stressful trying to get sound together. I understand. Thank you. I appreciate it.
For sure. So one of the things I love that everyone has already talked about is like resilience is a story of Black people throughout time in this country and across the globe, period. It has always been, right? And it hasn't been by choice. It's been for the sake of survival. And they have done it, Black people have done it beautifully, right? Where it's about caring and loving for and protecting each other, whether it is cooperative economics and getting resources. Black people are the most philanthropic group, according to the Pew Research, by putting their body in harm's way to gain civil rights and access, or even through brilliance, like in creating things, through music, through arts, through storytelling. They've reimagined and recreated a free world and a better America when it didn't offer it. And I think one of the things I want to talk about is protective factors. So research shows that protective factors increase resilience in people, right? And Dr. Brown talks about some of the reasons why resilience in Black communities has been as impactful as it's been is through racial socialization and instilling counter narratives and pride from parents to their children, right? But I think today we're not here to talk about how Black people have resisted, and because they have done the work, they have been doing the work. What I really want to ask, and for us to wrestle with, and especially as a city and as a community, is what protective factors are we going to put in place to increase the resilience of Black people in Dallas?
That's good. That's
what
good.
are we going to do through our systems and our institutions and our policies, through our allocated budget dollars, so that Black lives can matter, right? So that they can continue to be resilient. We acknowledge that as a people group, Black people have been doing that. And so what is on us to do that? And how do we do it in ways that are measured specifically? And so you talked about 3 areas: race, criminal justice, inclusive economies. And so one of the things that Dallas TRHT, which is one of the co-hosts of this conversation, they listed an actual policy through the city of Dallas And it was a race-based policy, and it was intended to segregate, and it was explicit, and it was intentional, and it had very precise impact as a result. I think we have to reconsider what are alternative race-based policies that we can start introducing that will have reverse some of that, right? So instead of just generalized policies, what are policies that we can put together in place at a city level, at a county level, at a state level that is intended to help Black people specifically, right? This harm is not going to unintentionally go away. It's not going to accidentally or as a byproduct of good intentions and goodwill be wished away, right? It is going to take explicit effort. And so one of the things I want to talk about on race is like reintroducing race-based policies, and shout out to, again, TRHT and Jerry Hawkins for doing some of that work and calling that out. I also want to talk about race as it intersects with immigration. I don't think we can have a conversation about Black lives in America without talking about Black immigrants. Being Black is one of the most dangerous things. We know that Black people are stopped by police at increasing levels, their counterparts, right? But what happens when you're stopped and you're Black and your status is also in jeopardy, right? Or you may not be able to have access to some of the other rights or papers to work and live, and even like undocumented. Here in North Texas, we have some of the most diverse people groups in the country, right? But we live in a state that is not friendly to that, right? And so what does it look like for us as a city, even beyond welcoming them, protecting them, right? And so I think we certainly have to think about that. When we talk about criminal justice, I'm very interested in this, and especially as it affects young people. And anytime you talk about diversion work or decreasing recidivism, you really don't even just start with the criminal legal system, because it's not a just system. You really start with what happens that gets students or young adults or people in that system in the first place, right? And so really even one of the conversations I think that are going on right now that we should all be tuned into is this idea of reallocating dollars from public safety to other things that could help our communities. And I think that there's merit to that, because if we have resources and people have access to the things that they need, they wouldn't choose, in some ways, a life of crime, right? And quite honestly, they're not even choosing it. Crime is choosing them, right? Because we are not providing opportunities or alternatives or resources for life to become better. And so what does that look like for us to not have a city budget where 60% is towards public safety and 1% is to our human and social needs and 5% is to our economic viability, right? What would it look like if that was different, if we reimagine those things? And there's a lot of incredible groups who are advocating for them and have been doing that work already that I think is worth lifting up. So if we want to decrease the number of people we have in our criminal justice system, if we don't want to be the state leading in executions, then we have to change people's lives. We have to change the quality of their lives, the quality of the education they get, the quality of after school and out of school time services we provide, actual jobs, not underwage jobs, but livable wage jobs, right? So we have a lot of people who are employed, and we talk about, unemployment rates are going down. But if they are underemployed and unable to actually afford the lives that they need to take care of their families, what good is it to have people working 40 and 50 hours and they can't meet those needs, right? So when I think about inclusive economies, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about philanthropy and the work of we have a very robust philanthropic community in Dallas. But what we know is that organizations and nonprofits who are leading are only getting a sliver of that money and those resources.
Right.
And so what would it look like if our philanthropic communities actually funded work that affects Black people, that are led by Black people, who have that proximity, the cultural competence and understanding to really bring change? So I don't think we can talk about the nonprofit work without talking about people who are funding that work. I also think when we talk about inclusive economy, that it has to have young people as partners. What would it look like if our young people are not just those that we dictated our ideas to, our recommendations to, but what if we partnered with them? What if we, really showed positive youth and adult relationships? That's a part of the 40 developmental assets, using a community youth development framework for that, like considering them as actual stakeholders in our efforts. At the Urban League, I work with over 300 African Americans who are looking for ways to get plugged in, to have civic engagements, find hope and community. And we're a huge transplant city where people are looking for that.
what is our city allow that? You know, do we have a culture in which people can come in and can network, can find a place to serve and grow and learn? And also we have an increasing number of entrepreneurs, right? There was data that showed that more Black women have filed to be entrepreneurs in the state of Texas than a lot of other places in the last year, right? And I don't think that's by choice. I think it's because of hostile work environments where people are choosing to rather work for themselves. And so one of my favorite things I love thinking about, I do a lot of work around diversity and inclusion and equity work. And so there's a quote that says, you know, diversity asks who's in the room. Inclusion says, have all the ideas been heard? But equity is trying to figure out who didn't get in and they could have, and what conditions created that to happen. And I think that's where we need to be, is like, what are our conditions? What are the systems that we have created that don't allow for sustainable change? And how are we going to measure that? So back to this, you know, idea of resilience, and us recognizing the incredible amount of resilience shown by Black people, and even the collaboration. I would also be remiss if I didn't give an incredible praise to the Congressional Black Caucus, because, you know, in the 90s, that paved way for more Black immigrants to come to America from Black countries. Like, right, that's my story, right, as an Ethiopian woman. And so even the solidarity in that, and how various Black lives and how they need to matter and in very unique ways. And so back to the question I started with is, you know, that can we ask ourselves is, what protective factors will we put in place to increase the resilience of Black people in Dallas through our budget, through our systems, through our institutions, through our practices, through our culture, that really doesn't just welcome people, but makes it a fair chance at thriving. And until we do that, I don't know that the recognition of the incredible work and pain and suffering that has happened up until this moment will really change or shift.
Very good point. Very, very good point. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insight, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. As you mentioned, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of policies that need to be that we need. Those race-based policies that you spoke on earlier. That equity. Thank you so much for addressing some of those issues. We definitely appreciate that. We do have a lot of questions surrounding education. So any of our panelists can actually feel free to address some of our questions. Again, if you are on live and you have a question for any of our panelists, please feel free to put it in our Q&A section and in the chat, and we will try to address as many as possible. This one comes from Corey Henderson and says he would like to know what ISD can do to help the educational gap and other things that affect Black and Brown communities. So I don't know if there's a particular panelist that wants to address that in particular, and maybe not that you, maybe Dr. Sorrell, you can't necessarily speak on the ISD, but you addressed something earlier, which I was unaware of, which I think I'm a huge advocate of mental health. I did not know that each student that comes into Paul Quinn College, you said they all receive a mental health examination. That's very important. And though that is what is, again, we don't talk about that in our community. So maybe that's something that we should actually consider when it comes to our ISD, because we are addressing trauma, which, as Dr. Baguette mentioned earlier, if we address trauma, then that helps us with our educational gap as well. Can you speak on that? You're muted, Dr. Sorrell.
So I think there's a lot that you touched on in that. Number one, it has been proven that knowledge that is gained in traumatic environments is not the same as knowledge that is gained freely. So DISD school district, where close to 90% of its students qualify for free and reduced lunches. In fact, I think the entire school district receives it. And the trauma associated with not having your fundamental basic needs met and security in that automatically compromises a lot of what can be done. So I do think that our schools need to recognize that. And I think that they work very hard to do so, right? So this isn't a situation where I think they aren't working to solve these. I absolutely think that they are. The magnitude of the challenge is just so significant. But I, one thing I want to just touch upon is just the mindset of how you create power shifts, right?
Right.
You don't become powerful asking people in power to give you some of their power so you can be powerful,
Oh,
right?
wow. Okay.
That's not how this. We have to get to the place where we will know that we are where we are supposed to be. When we stop having to people to give us opportunities, stable, right? And it's a tricky dance, okay? Because you can say, well, wait a minute, we have a right to these things. Well, yes, we do. We have to be taught to be more entrepreneurial, right? Like I so much like we are some of the most entrepreneurial people in the world, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm the child of entrepreneurs, right? I mean, entrepreneurship took my family from poverty to a very, very good life. All right. So I understand it because my father never went to college, right? He grew up in poverty. My mother grew up in rural poverty. My sister and I never knew poverty because they built this thriving business. So our pathway, I think, forward is what I like to call the perfect marriage of Du Bois and Washington, right? You have to cultivate your mind. You have to have a higher order and ability to think, but you also have to have the ability to create value with a skill, right? And your skill doesn't necessarily have to be working with your hands, but there has to be something there that disturbs or that gives you the ability to participate more fully economically. And we as a community have a but we also have a right to support each other and help build each other up. And I think those things are important. And I think our schools, I mean, one of the things that really hurts me deeply is that we don't treat the schools as community resources, right? I mean,
There you
our teachers have to be allies. Our parents have to be allies. But our schools have to understand that if your parents are working 2 and 3 jobs, they can't come to parent-teacher conferences in a traditional way. So maybe you need to figure out how to bring the parent-teacher conferences to them. Maybe we need to find a way to build bridges and be more accessible so that parents feel welcome and they feel empowered and they don't feel at a disadvantage because they didn't go to school. Maybe they didn't finish school, right? It's still your child. You still have a dream for that child, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
one of the things we work really hard to do at Paul Quinn is to make sure people know that we value their right to use their voice, right? And we don't treat their voice as an inconvenience, right? We seek that voice out. And I think that as we're looking at all of this, right, as we're looking at how you use schools to create resilience, I think we have to, first of all, use the schools to teach empowerment to the students, right? And also teach empowerment to their families. It's not just the students who's at school with you. There's also everyone in that house that's at school with you as well.
That's good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Bimnet, I'm not sure if you're still there, but our next question, I believe, you can address. That question comes from Kayla Garner, and it says, earlier you spoke on the fact that our Black and Brown communities and the organizations within, they're not getting the funding, right? You talked about the nonprofit organizations. So yes, Kayla Garner says, how can we ensure the funds for Black and Brown communities are being given to those organizations that truly represent us? How can we bridge that gap?
I think that's a very important question, and I appreciate it. Certainly, I think it really starts with us holding accountable who our leaders are, and our foundations. And this really also comes like from the city and how we do business and who we grant our contracts to, right? We know that there's quotas in there that's supposed to be MWBE, but you know, even when the pandemic happened, right, from this administration at the White House, they actually removed some of those requirements for Black people to get those dollars, right? And so this is really at all levels, right, in our philanthropic work, in our public work, in our government work. I think you have to put your dollars where your values are. And if we are saying that we value Black lives, it really, again, has to be in a race-based policy, right? Like if we know that this is an intentional maybe unintentional, but quite honestly, intentional outcome, that there's a disparity in who's receiving these resources, then we have to do work to be proximal to people who are. I think a part of it is that some of the leaders, business owners, even nonprofits and foundations may not know. And today, in the year of 2020, ignorance is not an excuse. We have way too many resources available to us to know, right?
Sure.
If we don't have those relationships, we certainly have Google. But I think building relationships and bridging those relationships in proximity with people who are doing that work is so important, so that we can empower that, right? Like the goal of our city and our community shouldn't be that we are holding power over, but we are really holding power with the change makers and the agents. And so that looks like building those relationships, proximity, building it into our policies, right? If we know that we have not intentionally given these resources and dollars over X amount of years, if the percentage of our give to Black and Brown led orgs is less than 50% in a city that is 50%, we have some work to do, right? Because that doesn't even match it per ratio or proportion of the population, right? So then that means we have to do some very intentional things to allocate, whether that's starting with 25% of our budget is going to do that. And we're going to go do the work to find out who these people are so that we can support it. I don't think we're in a place right now with a disparity in resource and sharing for a lack of people being out there, right? We have so many incredible organizations, leaders, initiatives, and they need our dollars. That's the biggest way we can prioritize and say these values matter, and that we appreciate people's resilience up until this point. This is how we put in those protective factors. So certainly I think instituting policy at an organization level to do so, building proximity, bridging relationships, right, bonding relationships. Shout out to Francois, who always talks about social capital, is with people who are similar to us, but bridging relationships is about building relationships with people who are different than us, right? And to the extent we can't do that and have enough closeness to understand the challenges in a meaningful way to help and affect it, then we'll continue to be where we're at.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Appreciate that.
We only have a few more minutes for a couple of more questions. I don't know if it's Mr. Broadnax, are you still on with us? I know he may have had to jump off earlier, so I'm not sure.
I am.
Okay, great. Well, it's so funny. The question comes from Dr. McElroy. And Dr. McElroy, you can unmute your mic anytime you want and ask a question, but I am going to read your question for you. I love how we are addressing so many issues, but still under the label of the resilience, right? She wanted to know, what is the city of Dallas doing about removing senior citizens of color who can't afford to live in the city of Dallas?
Well, that's a tough question.
That is a tough question.
We are not in the habit or business of moving people out of Dallas. I think so. I would say I don't think we're operating in that space. I think if the question is finding a way to make sure that our community is, I guess, situated to ensure that senior citizens, African American or others, have a place here from affordability, from a resource and or services perspective, I think that's where I think we can work harder and work smarter to figure that out, particularly those living in conditions that they may have lived for quite a long time in their lives, but it's now extremely non-conducive as they age. And so I'd love to have some conversation with her to understand at least her perspective on why, in fact, that would need to be done. But I would say to you, I think we need to work harder to ensure that people in our community who have obviously, in many cases, gone through a lot, deserve at least some perspective in their later years to, I guess, hopefully get the things that they hadn't gotten for the previous years and find a way to do that where they've been situated and live. So we are not in that space, but I'd love to understand better how we could provide services that make people want to stay here and I guess spend out their last remaining days here in the city of Dallas.
Could I make a suggestion?
Yes, ma'am.
There are some cities who have rent control. And then there are some cities who make sure that the developers reserve a certain amount of space in their luxury apartments. The apartments that came about through tearing down the affordable apartment complex, and they build this luxury apartment, and the people who were living in it and got used to it, they have to move out because they can't afford, they double and triple the rent. So those two things I would like to see if the Dallas could incorporate in some measure.
And so thank you for that clarification. We don't do rent control specifically. I think similar to some other cities and or states. We do, though, try to encourage and support affordability at a level that seniors might be able to afford to live in some of the newer developments, as well as we actually are building and would hope to build more exclusive senior related housing that again is also income and rent restricted. And so I hear what you're saying as it relates to trying to blend that into some of either the higher end types of developments that we've got. That's something we could obviously look at and explore, and a great topic for me to have with our chair of our Housing and Homelessness Committee. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take one more question and then we'll have our closing remarks from our panelists. Again, we could literally be on here probably till 5 o'clock this afternoon and not touch on every topic that, you know, and every question that we have. This question actually comes from Vincent, and any one of our panelists can take this. When it comes to our Black youth, how do we promote and keep the mindset of resilience and hope? And not only with everything that's going on, America is in a disarray. Our students are confused. Our children are confused. They are losing hope. How do we promote resilience and hope within them when they're seeing the opposite?
So let me at least take at least a part of that question.
Sure.
I think, quite honestly, you know, we've got to figure out how to put in front of them more mentors, people like the gentleman on this call and others out in the community that may not even get an opportunity to be on a call like this or be a panelist, to find a way to make sure you're continually in front of them to show that one, somebody cares, but also in some cases can show them that their future is brighter than their current state, and their past and their surroundings do not limit and or dictate where they can be in life. And so if the gentlemen on this call are similar to me, you know, you didn't grow up with a lot of expectations from some people outside of your immediate circle, but the people that walked into your life, whether it was teachers, neighbors, or others, found ways to continually remind you that you can be anything that you want to be. And I think when young kids don't hear those kinds of things and they see what they see out of their window or when they walk down the street, particularly given some of the conditions in this community, they really don't make those decisions in the moment because they look at their current state and understand and or think that it can't get any better than this. And so what do I have to lose? And so you got to give them the option to see that they have a lot to lose by some decisions that they make. And you can only do that when you hear positivity and can see someone caring for you and helping you find a way to get to a better place. And so for me, I think it starts with mentorship. And we got so many kids in this community that big brothers and big sisters are looking for people like the men on this phone, 700 to 800 youth just waiting to find a match for someone to spend an hour every other week with them to, again, share with them how they're going to be better than they are today in the future. So again, I think for me, mentorship is a way to do that. And I think we've got to figure out how to promote that and get more people in these young people's lives that are going to help them become who they hopefully would want to dream to become at some point in their future.
That's a really great start, Mr. Broadnax. I am also a huge advocate of mentorship. But I think that to take it a step further, I challenge everybody that's on this call today, all of the participants that joined in just to watch. You don't have to be in some prominent position to be a mentor. They just need us. And I always say whenever I speak on panels, sometimes we become successful and we forget to stretch back. We forget to inconvenience ourselves. We forget to, go back and help the little kid that looked just like us that needed to just hear some encouraging words. So from everybody on the panel today and all of the participants, I encourage you sometimes, and as I have to do myself, what am I doing in my community? What am I doing to make sure? And again, it's not about saving the world, it's saving the one. So we all need to challenge ourselves. And then when we get off this call today, we need to call our friends and family and challenge them and say, what are we doing outside of our own bubble, outside of our family? True enough, we need it within our own family, but let's just adopt another kid, right? Just one more that we can pour hope into them. So I definitely think that mentorship is a great start. Dr. Sorrell, would you like to also address that question as well?
And I want to actually just piggyback on you and TC's point and expand the mentoring concept, right? Because I think that a lot of times we view mentoring as this one-on-one relationship. And when you approach people and say, well, you mentor me, I mean, that's overwhelming, right? Because
yeah, for sure.
Into saying, well, I'm so busy, I have so much going on. And I learned at a younger age that I just hijacked mentors, right? I don't ever ask people to be a mentor. I just ask you a question. And as long as you answer my question, you're mentoring me, right? I mean, just as long as you pick up the phone, yeah. Turn the email, something like that, then we are now in a mentoring relationship. But we have to recognize that for a lot of students, they don't have a foundation to approach it that way, right? And
that's
so
very true. Good point.
There are entities out here. There are, and one I'll tell you about. So we have this amazing network of independent schools in this city, right? And the independent schools are schools where, typically the people who go to school there and their families are well resourced. When you walk through the halls of the independent schools, they are not diverse in any way, shape, or form. All right. The teachers aren't diverse. The administrators aren't diverse. Students aren't diverse. Doesn't mean they're bad people. It's just not diverse. So now we have, and they typically reside in certain parts of the city. All right. So when you are a student from an under-resourced community, you suffer from a hope deficit. You haven't seen enough, right? You haven't been exposed enough. And all of our institutions take it upon themselves to say, we could address a lot of these issues simply by providing opportunities for people to be exposed to the benefits that we can provide. And then we need to hold people accountable, right? We need to say to, let's pick some of these non-traditional entities. The independent schools, hey, you can do better, right? Do better. Get out, engage more, and understand engaging means you have to keep coming back. You can't just say, oh, I've had a couple bad experiences and I'm not going to go forward with that, because all of us, if that was the approach we took to any problem solving, we wouldn't get there. I mean, if TC said, oh, I had a bad city council meeting, I'm not going back, he would never have an amazing career.
Imagine,
if Kelvin
yes.
Yeah, like, Jada, the first time you played a record, it didn't move the crowd and you were like, I'm out, that you wouldn't be who you are. We all have stumbled. Like, it's part of the process. And I just think that we have to put our arms around our communities, and we have to engage and lift them and mentor them. But we have to understand that it's not an additional responsibility. It's our core responsibility. Right? So you don't have a choice.
You're right. Thank you.
You don't have a choice.
I love that. And you're absolutely right when you say mentorship is not necessarily one-on-one. And I'm still in that quote from you when I go speak somewhere else. Okay, I'm going to say you got to hijack your mentors. I love that. Dr. Baguette, can you speak on this as well, just really briefly, because we're getting ready to wrap. But we're talking about how to promote the mindset of resilience and hope in our youth, right? And we started talking about mentorship or what we can do to continue this conversation and promote that hope. You're muted. Your mic is muted.
I've been off camera, but I've been present the entire time, so I've heard the conversation. And I just want to add a couple of things. One is it's Baguette. I'm a simple kid from North Carolina, so I used to tell people, it's like,
oh, I'm doing you like diamonds. I'm sorry, I'm giving you the diamond. Okay, Baguette. Okay,
look, like you put something in a bag, you bag it.
Okay.
The other thing, but thank you for educating me. But the second thing is, I want to just share. I have one of my mentors. I didn't even use that language when I rolled up on his doorstep as a kid, saying that I wanted to be a doctor, ringing his doorbell on a Saturday afternoon, and his wife welcomed me in and gave me a sandwich. I had no language other than, I've heard about you and you're a doctor and I want to do what you're doing. Can you talk to me about that? He stayed with me for decades. But the thing that he would say to me often was this. He said, Kelvin, when I'd say, but look at my circumstances or look at this situation, he'd say, Kelvin, you have to remember two things. It's possible because it was possible for me. And there's the distance between us is not as great. And the second thing is what will separate us is time and what you do with your time. And so what I like to offer people is when they look at us, they see where we are now. We could do a lot better in our communities if we could share where we came from and to recognize that we haven't always existed in suits and ties and sat behind desks. Yes. That's not the way life has not been for us a crystal stair. It has not been easy. And I think far too often people try to make us the exceptions, which creates greater distance between those who look like us and who want to reach into us and that we want to reach into. So we've got to tell more of our story so they recognize really the thing that separates us is time. Other than that, that's the greatest factor. So that's what I'll close with.
Dr. Baguette, see, I got it right. See, Dr. Baguette, see, you look, you have the title of doctor. After all this is over, we got a couple of pastors on this call too, okay? I just want you to know that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. As much as I hate to, it is time for us to wrap, and we will continue to have these important conversations. We will continue to address these issues until we see change. So I would like each panelist to give us some closing remarks in about 30 seconds to a minute at most, probably 30 seconds. What are our next steps? Dr. McElroy, I'd like to start with you.
Okay, my statement is we have to work on two tracks. One is racism and the other one is in our communities. What are we going to do about guns? And what are we going to do about our kids? Are we going to take them off the iPads and the phones and spend more time with them? When we talk about the community, if we say that there are things that we can do, we often get criticized and we deal only with the racism and the white part of it. But I think we have to come within our community. And I see with the organizations we have, with the young people, we have armies of young people who can help us in the community with that second track.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
They can be the mentors.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Bimnet, please, closing remarks. What would you say our next step should be?
So I'm going to take a step back really quickly because you asked what are some ways, and I wanted to provide at least two resources. So for you guys wanting to support, I know at the State Fair of Texas, we have a resource guide that we put together. If you just go to bigtex.com under supporting Texans, I'll drop the link. There is an incredible list of nonprofits that are mostly led by people of color, by Black people explicitly in the South Dallas Fair Park area. And so really getting involved and plugging with their work is a great way. And another one is through our Dallas Black Chamber that is being led by Harrison Blair. They've done an incredible job by helping Black businesses have access to the Paycheck Protection Program in this pandemic, among other things. And so I think those are some immediate ways where we can certainly help people get connected. But I think my next steps and what I would recommend is intersectional advocacy, so that all Black lives matter, whether it is poor, trans, immigrant. If Dallas isn't a safe and accessible place for those of us with the least in power, then it really is going to be a hard place for all of us to live, because our stories and our lives are just like so interconnected. And we will know we reached it when we can measure that by how freely people can live without dying. We'll know we reached it when our schools and our staff have enough funding. We'll know we reached that when we have our a change in the disparities in our sentencing, incarceration, and the number of people, Black people that are held even before they get to trial. We'll know that we've reached it when Texas is not leading in the number of uninsured children. We'll know when Dallas is not leading the nation in neighborhood inequality, right? When our budgets are different. And so I think it really starts by us evaluating the systems and processes we're already a part of. So our workplace, how do we use a racial equity lens to effectively really check and see if it's having race-based disparity, disparate outcomes. And so I think when we can do that, and then we put our budgets to actually value Black lives and those things that make them safe,
Right.
Then we'll have a different world. So if resiliency has been the story of Black people up until this moment, then racial equity has to be our future.
Absolutely. I love that. Mr. Broadnax?
Thank you. You know, I'd say for me, the next steps need to be, as a community, as a city, demonstrated action and move beyond talk and conversations and actually lean into actually changing and doing versus pontificating about what needs to be done, and don't stand, I guess, on the sidelines cheering, but get in the game. And I'd say that speaks as it relates to how we allocate resources and truly understand equity and racial equity are great sound bites and words. But I've been having that conversation, quite honestly, for the last 25 years in local government, whether that's a workforce that should reflect the community and or policies that don't exclude. And those things don't just happen. They take action and intestinal fortitude. And I'm hopeful that at this time and moment with the conversation, that the courage that many people need to continue to speak the truth to power and allow for the movements and the changes to occur, that actually happens this time. Because it was 6 years ago, we thought it was going to happen based on the same types of conversations. And I just think now is the time to really move forward and take actions and get beyond lip service.
There you go. Now is the time. Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Baguette?
Yeah, I'll say right now, I'm gonna just direct this to COVID-19 and making sure that we don't suffer or get harmed more than we might have been able to avoid. So I just say two things: get tested and get treated. You may or may not be surprised by the number of other diagnosis conditions that are being ignored right now, with people not going for follow-up, not going to medical centers. We're also under tested. We are working very hard in the city of Dallas. You can go to the city of Dallas website. I want to also give a shout back to President Sorrell, because we worked at Paul Quinn to put together part of our neighborhood testing strategy. We're expanding that to other sites as well. So get tested, and also make sure that if you need it, that you get treatment for COVID and you get treated for any other conditions that you have.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And if there's any way that as a radio station we can help you get the word out on those testing sites, please let us know.
And there is, and we will get back to you.
Look, he was like, I am holding you to this. I'm saying it in front of everybody. No, I appreciate that. Dr. Sorrell. Oh, there you go.
I would tell you that I think the single most important thing we can do right now is vote, right? Because you don't get a change in the leadership, the policy, the advocacy, all of this will be continuing to be boulders rolled up the hill, right? At some point, we have to have people who are friendly to our causes, in positions to sustainably affect change. And there's a difference between having people that are friendly to your cause and advocates for your cause. And we have to have advocates to the cause, because we simply cannot afford to continue to have to battle everyone up the chain, knowing that no matter how high we push it, they're going to use everything at their disposal to put people in place that can continue to disenfranchise us.
Thank you, Dr.
And the
Sorrell.
census, sorry, Lee, can we also talk about the census, making sure that people are counted? Very,
There
very
you go.
important.
I was just about to address that. Yes, if we want funding in our communities, we also have to fill out our census. We have so many conspiracy theories about why we don't want to vote, why we don't want to fill out our census, but it's very, very, very important. So yes,
Hey,
thank you, Bimnet, for bringing it up.
Can I add
Yes.
this one thing about this? Folks need to know what to do if they've lost the census packet that was mailed to the house,
Okay.
right? Because I know lots of people who have lost their access to, lost the packet. And when I talk to them about the census, they're like, well, I don't know where it is. So just, I think that's something we need to make sure people understand. And just because you lost the packet doesn't mean you're off the hook for filling out the census.
There you go. It looks like Chief Liz is holding up one of our QR codes right now. Hashtag Dallas Counts 2020. So I'm sure you can search that probably on Twitter and Instagram. Also go to the City of Dallas website. And I don't know if anybody has a QR code reader. You could probably scan that QR code that Chief Liz is holding up right now. And that will also get you the information on the census. We have added all of our Twitter tags in the chat. So if you have any further questions, please make sure you just continue to keep in contact with us. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep pushing things forward until we see substantial change, right? The change that we need. I just want to say thank you to the City of Dallas, Dr. Wilson, Chief Liz. Thank you all so much for having me today, allowing me to moderate such an amazing panel. And thank you to everyone who logged on. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all your questions, but this is just the beginning, right? We're going to continue to have this conversation. So what did Nipsey Hussle say? The marathon continues, right? So let's stay resilient and remain unsilent until we see true change. And everybody have a great afternoon.
Thank you. And thank you to our ASL interpreter, Laura Torres.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.